Teachers need to share. Why? Because they're time poor, they don't have sufficient funds to buy things. They might have their own cash which they have to spend because the school won't let them buy things, and that's wrong also. So I think sharing things for free, giving teachers even the little things on your website, say reading time's 2 minutes long. When I look at my analytics and look at how long people read the site for, and knowing the busy nature of teachers, well, if I'm on the bus to work and I've got 3 minutes, I'm going to read today's blog, and it might give me 1 or 2 ideas to think about, and I'll use it or share it in a staff meeting. Yeah. So it's critical that teachers have opportunities to share, that it's in a bite-sized format and it's free. Got it. And I think that's where the growth of Teacher Toolkit has been very successful.
Welcome to the Passion for Learning Inspiring Leaders show. Today we have a really exciting guest who needs little or no introduction. Ross M McGill is an ex-deputy head teacher and founder of Teacher Toolkit, who does teacher training across the globe and school leadership development training. Ross is also the author of Mark Plan Teach, as well as his new book, Just Great Teaching, amongst many other books that he's authored, selling over 20,000 copies across the globe. In today's episode, we talk about teacher training, CPD, staff well-being and sustainability to ensure that we embed a passion for learning across the globe and across the community of education. Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen, Ross M McGill. Ross M McGill, lovely
Just
to
Ross.
see you.
I had to put Morrison on my book title, now the whole world knows my middle name. But only because I believe there's another Ross McGill who's written a book.
Really?
Yeah, so you're trying to be a bit niche and different, so yeah. I could have just put M. Dot,
right.
But the publisher said no Morrison, so yeah, so it's people either call me a double barrel name or the full name, but it's just Ross.
Just Ross, keep it simple, keep it clean. Okay, cool. Awesome. So welcome. Thank you for being on the show. It's a real honour to have you here.
Yeah,
for sure.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and you are like global in the education space. I don't think there's teachers out there.
There's 1 or 2 that don't know me.
So it's really difficult to go on social media in any education way and not find you and not discover who you are and what you do. But for the people that don't know who you are,
there are some.
Right? Few. Yeah. Tell us about who you are and what you do.
Oh, well, I'm going through an identity crisis at the moment. I've been a teacher for 25 years, so I started teaching when I was 18 in sixth form. While I was studying for sixth form, I loved my design technology. My teacher knew I loved kids. My background was always with kids in my mother and father's field of work, in kind of homeless hostel environments. So I was always around lots of people and learning or teaching in some way, even early on in my teenage years. So it was in my blood to work with other people. But I guess the critical conversation was, you like kids, you love DT, why don't you be a DT teacher? So in my free periods as a sixth form, I started to teach. And this was up in Blackpool at the time. Talk about my journey where I've lived is another fascinating chapter. I moved to London, Southeast London, in the early 90s, trained to be a teacher, the good old-fashioned 4-year degree where you learn the craft of teaching, you learn the child development, the psychology, education, history, and you also develop your subject knowledge. And full placements around schools in Southeast London, independent and state. And then I've tried to leave London 3 or 4 times in my life, but I'm still here 25 years later. School leader for about 17 of those years, young middle leader, going back a very long time, and up to the kind of ranks of deputy headship, and sometimes the odd day acting as a head here or there, and at least 2 of the 3 schools where I was a senior leader. And it's been an interesting journey, but I started blogging. I've been blogging for about 20 years, but it is Teacher Toolkit for 12. I guess it only really started to make a bit of noise 2011 or 12-ish time. Again, there's a reason for that. And it's evolved into Twitter, books, speaking, appearing on videos. So that's it. I'm now studying for my doctorate full-time. I'm writing books part-time, but it's a full-time job, it feels like. The blog's a full-time job, and I now spend my kind of daily work in schools all across the UK, but increasingly now it's going beyond Europe actually, to the Middle East and to the Far East later this year. So yeah, it's exciting times.
Yeah, fantastic, and that's amazing. One of the things that you touched on there was that you did a 4-year teacher training. How is that different to somebody that does a PGCE or something different?
I mean, I had my views very early on, and I guess it was full of lots of stereotypes, that you do a degree in history, you don't really know what you want to do, and then, I'll do a PGCE for a year and be a full-time teacher. And the nature of the course is very different, of course, because you're in a school full-time for 30+ weeks, whereas a Bachelor of Education, you're in college full-time, and then you spend between 6 to 12 weeks in a school placement. So you have... And I know PGCE, you have 2 or 3 different, at least 2 schools throughout the year, but you get a chance to refine, come back, look at your subject knowledge, look at the theory, whereas a PGCE, you have very limited time to do that. Yes, you've got your degree, and you have at least half a day a week back in your kind of university environment. So I wouldn't say one's better than the other, but they certainly breed a different type of teacher.
What do you think the key difference is?
Again, I have to be careful I'm not biased here, but I've worked with brilliant teachers from PGCE backgrounds. I've worked with terrible teachers from B.Ed backgrounds. Obviously we have new routes where degrees are now squeezed into a couple of years, or you have the Teach First model, where if I think back to when I was 19 and went straight into the classroom, but I was there full time and being paid for it, I don't know if I could have coped. Right. Not because of the structure, I just don't think maybe me mentally was prepared for that. Again, it's all hypothetical, I don't know, but if you put me in a corner, I think if we just get any route for teachers to be in teaching is a good thing, regardless of route, and it should all be celebrated. I don't think there could be a bit of research out there kind of might suggest in terms of attrition how long you last. As we know, Teach First statistics or attrition is incredibly high. If I think of the Department for Education workforce census, you look at the number of teachers that leave throughout the last 20 years, there's all the statistics there that are evident, but if we want to tackle which type of teaching route has a better impact on outcomes, I think it'd be incredibly complex to research and to prove. So yeah, I think to have teachers enter the profession is a good thing. I think as many opportunities and pathways to meet people's needs are a good thing. I think me perhaps saying one's better than the other is not helpful. I just think the 4 years was good for me.
Yeah, and it worked.
If you did the Teach First and it worked and it was good for you, then that should also be welcome.
Yeah, one of the things that you talk about a lot and that I think about a lot is what makes a really good teacher? And are teachers born or are they created? Right,
well they're created. You have to have certain passions, certain characteristics. I've done lots of research in terms of teacher personality and what have you. But they are created because things require practice. Basketballer, you have to practice shooting the hoop. You might like basketball, you might like playing with a ball, but you have to practice. Teaching is a deliberate practice. It requires training, not just through your degree pathway, but you need to practice at certain things in the classroom. And you do a lot of things unobserved and experimental. I guess with a coach or with an observer, they've got the whole things where you dance to a tick list or an observation, or you do things with a coach or a mentor and you refine your practice. They are definitely created. In terms of what makes a good teacher, it's all the usual cliches, but I want to avoid. But I do think a good teacher has to hold kids to account. So that firm and fair. They need to communicate their boundaries very clearly. They need to let kids know when they cross the line and actually follow through what they say. And I think when kids know the boundaries, then also you can start to get very, once those things are in place, you can start to unlock your subject knowledge, develop passion for the subject, and then along the way you can loosen up and start to have a bit of banter in the classroom. And when kids start to quote back your catchphrases, or they know when and where the moment is to make a little bit of fun out of you, then you know you're in a very good place. But that takes years to master, and it can't be achieved very quickly on.
Yeah. You mentioned catchphrases and people sort of having that banter with you. What were your catchphrases when you were teaching?
Oh God, I can't remember. So I was a design technology teacher. Probably for the first 10 years of my career, I walked around with an apron. It's like with a PE teacher like yourself, you walk around in your shorts pretty much all year and in the winter. So for me, you know, moving away from the stereotype of you must wear a tie to eventually maybe an open collar as a young middle leader, and then back into senior leadership, the stereotype of having a tie again. One thing that was common was my apron. And whether it was just getting on a kid's apron over your head, but eventually I got the jacket, and then in all the different pockets I had the little screw or the scalpel or all the tools that I needed for all the different machines. And leading our design technology department, all our teachers worked across all the material areas for Key Stage 3 teaching at least. So you'd be in a food room, so you'd have to change it from a blue apron to a white apron, chef's outfit type thing. But yeah, that was the things that I remember fondly, and I guess all kids always would, a kid's catchphrase, so you must have something in your pocket type of thing. So I don't know what my catchphrases were, but I'm sure a lot of kids would have memorable moments of things, my behaviours, as kids often do. Yeah, I'm struggling to think of a catchphrase. I'll have a think as we talk.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem at all. And then what's the difference for you now, as in not being directly in a particular school every single day and actually leading teacher training? How does that work for you, and how do you find that process?
I miss being in a school environment deeply. The 1,000+ kids, the staff, the relationships you build. What I don't miss is the headaches of it all. Although the headaches are good and they develop you as a person. So I've learnt everything in my life from the world of education. But with a heavy workload, and I guess with the teaching and the books and the blogs, in many ways I was probably doing 2 or 3 jobs at once. So when that starts to impact on your health, your workload, your family life, you have to start making decisions. So I guess the blog became a difficulty because it became a full-time job on top of being a senior leader, so it was hard to sustain both. But what's interesting now is, although day to day now, probably 1 or 2 tenths of my week would be on the website. And I guess it's seasonal, just like any school academic year. But those parts, I used to love coming home from work and sitting at my computer and be able to write. And towards the end of my career, I started to feel happier there. Now, I don't mind doing it, but I feel happier back in schools. Right. It's really interesting how it's changing, because I love people, and I've been around people my entire life. And you know, the things we do in schools requires people to improve performance, and obviously with lots of research and metrics and performance, those things might get in the way or frustrate each other. But you know, probably 2 or 3 times a week I'm in a school, all parts of the country, if not in parts of the world. So I have to learn how to manage my diary, the trials and tribulations of travel, the tiredness, you know, managing family life as well. And I guess I'm being asked to do all sorts of interesting things, from things like this to podcasts, to interviews, to keynote events, to ed tech organisations where I'm either looking at their research or their products, reviewing them, giving them advice as a teacher or school leader, or conducting research at Cambridge or with UCL, for example, trying to bring schools and teachers together to influence the dialogue. So I kind of think back to my own career, people that were interested in my work or my school's work or wanted a school to volunteer to do X. Yeah. I can now see I'm evolving into that role, influencing and supporting schools from academics would probably call it a macro level. Yeah. Macro, meso, micro, isn't it? If I've got those the right way around. So yeah, I'm trying to influence all 3 now. Yeah. I guess I'm working at a macro level across all organisations.
Sure, and one of the things that you mentioned was that you kind of miss being in that school environment every day.
Yes.
What was like the most exciting, or one of the most exciting moments for you when you were in school?
I probably haven't got anything that stands out immediately. My most memorable moments are often when I was at a happy point,
Right.
rather than when the school was.
Right.
And that often is your own physical and mental well-being. Some of the projects that you're working on, particularly when they involve bringing lots of other people together, they then might have an impact on 30 kids or 300. Or bringing in, so teach meets, I used to organise them at my school, we'd have 500 plus people come for a free event after school hours. The hashtag would trend on Twitter across the UK, so things like that, being part of instigating that and facilitating it, those were really memorable moments. Obviously there's thousands in my classroom that I've forgotten, but you know, that always that eureka moment, or the heartbreaking stories where you got a vulnerable child and you know, they might be passed on from family to family, and then they get through school and survive, and they come to you at the end of the results day and give you a thank you or send you a card. Those things are kind of career-defining moments.
Sure. I mean, you speak about resilience quite a lot, and we often speak about resilience in terms of children and how they bounce back from challenges and failure. What's like some of the big things that you've gone through as a challenge, and how have you bounced back from that? Well, you must have done it numerous times.
Oh yeah, so
entrepreneur.
my biggest ones, particularly, apart from making the silly mistakes either in the classroom or as a teacher, you know, and obviously you got the safeguard and risk alarm at all times.
Absolutely.
But from little things to letting the kids out too early before the bell and then getting told off,
Yeah.
to then being a bit more aware of your clock and your time management, to dealing with just life things. Father passing away in 2004, or I remember back to the late 90s when my grandmother died. It was the first immediate relative for me as a very young person. So I guess I was probably 23, 24 at the time. That was my first real experience of death. So I kind of evaluated at the time how that impacted on me personally and also in the classroom. Then when my father passed away in 2004, that was in August, so just before the school year started. And I remember returning back to school feeling incredibly down and demotivated, and probably looking back went through a bout of depression but not being aware of it, and being insular and locking myself away, but also having to go back into school and deal with the day-to-day stuff and kids being kids and just getting on with it and not really knowing. And then there's the whole, how much do you tell kids, how much you don't, trying to manage all your deadlines. Probably two other key moments would be 2011, seeing my job being made redundant, so in a position to apply for another job or take voluntary. So I was going to be a dad for the first time, so I took voluntary, and this was about 17, 18 years of teaching at the time. But you know, taking a big risk and not really understanding the impact or the stigma associated with being redundant, how difficult it might be to get back into teaching, the impact on me mentally, but also the physical stuff in terms of finances. So going from a very good salary to zero, living off a pay packet, and then trying to be a dad and a husband, and the impact it had on my finances at home. Took many years to get over that. And then the latest one was probably only a couple of years ago when I decided to step out. A mixture of reasons. My glass half empty story is school inspection bias, putting the school into a particular category, seeing the school then buckle, many senior staff have to go, me then deciding, well, I've been here before where my livelihood or my own passion or opportunities are then threatened by the system, so making a choice to step out. My glass half full story, as my wife always reminds me, is now being one of the most followed websites, most influential teachers, blah 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 on Twitter. That became a full-time job, and I've been trying to manage that online. You know, I said before we came on camera, I've got 4,000 to 5,000 notifications a month. I could ignore them, but then I guess where my growth has come was by replying to people, being a bit of a helpline to other new teachers, and trying to balance that my own self in terms of my own workload. Became a full-time job, and naturally over time it became very much a free service. And then when it started to impact on me, it started to make decisions about, well, how much of this can I continue to do for free on top of a full-time job? And eventually money decisions started to be involved in terms of me paying for things to make things work, versus people asking to pay for things for me to share certain things. So that's now become a full-time job, but that was going on very much behind the scenes for a long time. I guess I was an early adopter to the blogging world, and it's snowballed, but I guess, you know, people wouldn't read it if there was no content there. So it's become a mixture of work, stroke have to, then to now love, that I enjoy doing it. And so that is the glass half full version, where I could have stepped out a long time ago. I think the battle was trying to sustain being a dad, being a full-time school leader, and a good one, and also trying to be a blogger and a good one, and a good dad as well, for that matter. But trying to be good at all of those things. So eventually, you know, I was watering myself down. But yeah, so there's lots of things going on there at that particular time, where that resilience and that difficulty and the headache of staying in or staying out, moving out, was probably the most recent, and equally just like challenging as is death, as is being redundant.
Yeah, I think you've been through so many different challenges and bounced back. You really strike me as somebody that is a education entrepreneur at heart, and somebody that really loves to make a wide impact, which is really remarkable.
I guess my social ID would say that. Before Twitter, I was doing all these things anyway. I just didn't probably have any evidence apart from my own classroom, or colleagues coming in saying, wow, that's an amazing resource, you should turn that into a book. But, you know, going back to kind of pre-2008, before Twitter, or was it 2004 or 5 before Facebook? You know, my handcrafted worksheets that I would spend hours drawing or typing up, and photocopy them and try and turn it into a nicer book. I've been doing those things for years. I guess my Bachelor of Education taught me those things, where we'd spend a lot of time as a design technologist creating resources, very conscious of the layout, the font, the typography, the audience receiving it. So is it a teacher, or is it a child? Is it a 3-year-old, or is it a 16-year-old? So all these decisions mattered. And I guess, you know, doing my master's degree while I was a middle leader, particularly on branding and typography and marketing, I guess as a teacher, as a designer, these things were emerging.
Love it.
So a lot of my thoughts, you know, I don't think it was a conscious process. It was all just part and parcel of day-to-day life or interests.
Yeah.